So pleased today to speak with Ryan Gottfredson, who's a Ph.D. and cutting-edge leadership development consultant, author, trainer, and researcher. Ryan is the Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of the book Success Mindsets: The Key to Unlocking Greater Success in Your Life, Work, and Leadership. He's also a leadership professor at the College of Business and Economics at California State University, Fullerton. I personally had an opportunity to meet Ryan several years ago, and we've since had him in to CertaPro Painters as a keynote speaker and as a coach of several of our franchisees. Very happy today to speak with Ryan Gottfredson on the Entrepreneurs United podcast. Today we're talking to Ryan Gottfredson, who's a PhD in organizational behavior and also an associate professor of leadership, has written a book, has a consulting practice, and an entrepreneur himself. And Ryan, if you could maybe give us a brief introduction to your business practice side and being an entrepreneur yourself, and bring us into some of the story of where you started and where you've become today.
For sure. So if you would have asked me even 4 years ago if I ever wanted to be an entrepreneur, I would have said, hell no. I mean, it was like a hard no. And I think one of the reasons why is at the time, entrepreneurship for me just seemed really scary. Like, this is really risky. I know the success rate is not very great. And I don't ever want to put myself in the position of where maybe if I fail with a business, that my family then suffers because of that. And that was kind of part of my mentality. And I think part of this mentality is why I became a professor to begin with, is I saw a professor being this really safe job, particularly if you get tenure. And so it would also have some good work-life balance. And there's many entrepreneurs that are just like, burning the candle at both ends. And so that was what was going in to kind of my perception of entrepreneurship. But then So I took a job at Cal State Fullerton, and in Orange County, California, one of the most expensive places to live in the country. A contact of mine reached out to me about a position with Gallup. So Gallup is this HR consulting company, and I jumped over and I took that position, and I had a great experience. I learned a ton, but it just wasn't a very good fit. And so I decided to come back to the university, and it's like, I almost have to do something. Like, I either have to move away from California or I need to start up my own business. And there's some other things that happened that we could dive into, but that was really the transition point for me starting up my own business. So I've been at it with my own consulting practice for about 2.5 years. And I'm still learning as we go, but I feel like it's been an incredible journey and so much different than what I anticipated.
Ryan, tell us about, you said you've been in the consulting practice for, did you say 2.5 years or so?
Yeah.
And why did you get into having a consulting practice? Because it's quite a grind. Like, why would somebody elect to get into that?
Well, for me, it actually didn't start necessarily with saying, I want to get into consulting. I mean, I kind of had that itch to do that because that's what I did with Gallup, and I knew that I could add some value in that area. I guess, I don't know if this is helpful to share, but as I was transitioning back to the university, at that time, a friend of mine, he's a CEO of a company. He's an entrepreneur himself. I met him, and he's this charismatic guy, and he hands me a book, and the book is The 5-Minute Journal. And he hands me this book, and I look at the title of journal, and outwardly I'm, oh, thank you so much. I love books. This is great. Inwardly, I'm thinking, there is no way in hell that I'm going to journal. Like, I am not a journaler. This is not going to happen. Anyways, I bring it home and I flip it open, and okay, it's not this big old journal. It's just answering a few questions in the morning and a few questions at night. And he said, I'm thinking to myself, he said that this will change my life. Maybe I'll just give it a shot. I'll give it 2 weeks and we'll see what happens. And so the questions that it asks you in the morning is, what are 3 things you're grateful for? What are 3 things that would make today amazing? And then fill in some self-affirmations. At night, it has you answer, what are 3 amazing things that happened? And what did you learn today that you can use to improve in the future? And as I did this on a daily basis, and even with less than 2 weeks, I felt this gradual shift away from this kind of, how do I stay safe, to how do I create a life that I want? How do I make today better than yesterday? How do I make this week better than last week? And so upon doing that, so that was my initial kind of shift. And I focus on mindsets. And in my terminology, I shifted from a prevention mindset to a promotion mindset. When I made that shift, then it led me to ask the question, what do I want to create? And what impact do I want to have? What is my destination? And that's, so my first thought was, I want to write a book. And because at this time, I'm doing a lot of research on mindsets, I think I can add to this space in a significant way, was my perception. And so my first step was actually, how do I actually write a book? And so in the process of learning about how to write a book, how to get picked up by a publisher, one of the first things that I learned is you've got to essentially create a platform for yourself. You've got to create an image and get followers that will then buy your book. So most publishers will not pick up a book by an unknown author unless they have an email list of over 10,000 people. And so at the time, I've got an email list of 0. And so now it becomes, how do I build this email list? And out of a wide variety of things, one of the elements then becomes, well, I need to start speaking. And that's essentially was where I started in terms of revenue generation. The more I spoke, then that led to more, I'm going to say, more pure consulting opportunities. So that may be a little bit longer winded answer than you want, but that's essentially the journey.
No, that's great. And then the speaking got you engagement with people who may buy the book. It also got you consulting opportunity. Also was able to build the email list. Tell us about how you ultimately, and some of the story ultimately got approved by the publisher to get a book out, of which I've got right here with me.
Yeah. So, and it was, I mean, part of it is, and I'm just a believer that if you're somebody who's taking actions, things are going to fall into place. You see, just before, with my prevention mindset, I really wasn't taking action and nothing was falling into place. As I'm just moving forward, just things ended up happening. So for example, one of the things I decided I wanted to do, knowing that I was going to write a book, is I went to a writer's workshop. Okay, so I go to a writer's workshop. I meet a guy who says, do you need a content editor? Somebody could read through your first draft and give you a suggestion for improvement. I said, yeah, that would be fantastic. So that led to that. And he says, well, I happen to have all these contacts. Maybe you could speak to some of them. So then he lines up speaking engagements. And then on the other side of things, I've got a friend, and I sat down to lunch with her one day and I said, what's new? And she says, I just finished, I'm writing a book and it just got picked up by a publisher. I'm like, no way. I didn't know you're writing a book. Tell me about it. She says, oh, well, my publisher's this. I said, well, I've been looking for a publisher for quite a while. Can you connect me? And literally less than 2 weeks later I've signed a deal with my publisher, and now it's gone on to, it was released May 5th. And around the time it was released, we were able to get it to hit the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller list. And that's even maybe an entrepreneurship aspect that we could come back to, but the pieces just kind of clicked. The more I take action, I just feel like good things fall into place.
And your book, I just looked it up before we hopped on Amazon. You've got 66 reviews on it, of which 97% of them are 4 and 5 star. 90% of them are 5-star. So that's pretty impressive for having come out just 4 months ago. I know my wife and I buy hundreds of things on Amazon and leave like very few reviews. So you didn't even have that many reviews in that short time is impressive. Can you give us maybe just a little prelude to the book on who's the type of person that you are gearing the book towards, and what would they benefit from reading it?
Yeah, so I had 3 different audiences in mind when I wrote the book. So one was natural achievers. So these are people that they're wanting the most cutting edge information in order to develop themselves to the fullest. They want to get the most out of life, and they're always chomping at the bit to what's new, what's cutting edge. So I wanted to speak to them. I also wanted to speak to stalled professionals. These are individuals who just feel stuck, and how do I get out of my rut? And then the third was to organizational leadership, kind of developers within organizations, because I wanted to speak to them to say, here's a cutting edge approach that might benefit you as you work with the leaders in your organizations in terms of developing them. So those are the three different audiences. And so what I'm effectively doing with this book is I'm adding the mind to the equation in terms of leadership development. So most leadership development philosophies, and Rich, you play in this space, so you tell me if I'm wrong, but my perception is that essentially all leadership development philosophies came, or at least were founded pre-2005. You agree or disagree?
I think it's pretty accurate.
All would be an absolute term. I would say the majority, the grand majority of, I would go with.
Yeah, that's a safe position, Rich. So,
yes, thank you.
So what this means, and in context to that, is we've learned more about the mind in the last 15 years than all of time before that. And so what this means is most of our leadership development philosophies don't include the mind. It's not because they didn't want to, it's just they didn't know how to, because we didn't know much about the mind. So when we focus on mindsets, what we're just doing is we're adding the mind to the equation, which is the root of everything that we do. And the better that we can understand it, and the better that we can shape it and rewire it so that it serves us in the ways that we want it to, then we're going to be more effective. And so the whole book is about focusing on mindsets, which are literally neural connections that serve as a circuit board in our brain. And if we can understand our current mindsets, understand better mindsets to have, then we become empowered to actually rewire our brain and become more of the person that we want to become.
So Ryan, we're talking about the book Success Mindset, and earlier in the conversation, you talked about not being sure you wanted to be an entrepreneur because of how scary it was, and risk, and the low chances of success. And here you are, an entrepreneur. So tell us a little bit more about what else you're doing right now with your business, and how do you feel now that you've kind of overcome that hurdle of being an entrepreneur? Because one of the things in the three categories you talked about, natural achievers, stalled professionals, and organizational leaders, I would think that number two right now, stalled professionals, is a massive category with everything that just happened so far in 2020 this year, where the economy might be going. There's a lot of stalled professionals going, okay, what am I going to do for the rest of my career? And maybe a conversion to entrepreneurism is something that they're seeking. Or you may have entrepreneurs that are starting things up that are still scared. And how does mindset play a piece in that? So I know it's a loaded question. There's two pieces of that. One is, tell us more about your current business, and talk to us more about the stalled professionals or young entrepreneurs and how mindset can really help them in their business.
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to maybe answer those in the opposite that you asked them. So I just took an Uber today for the first time in who knows how long. And I was talking to the Uber driver, and I asked him, how has COVID affected you? And he says, I haven't been driving. Like literally there's no business. So what I've been doing for the last 6 months is I've been taking a course to become a chiropractor. Or some sort of chiropractor tech. I wasn't really sure, but to me, this was, this is the effect that the COVID pandemic has had on people. We as individuals, we realize we may need to shift and adapt ourselves. But then at an organization, and that's usually these stalled professionals, at an organizational level, leaders are feeling that same thing. Is they're saying we need to become more agile, because ready or not, when COVID hit, we're turning agile. And the reality is that some have done it well and others haven't. And those who have done it well already had an agile culture to begin with. And so in terms of what I've been doing, it was really interesting because pre-COVID, most of my revenue came from large speaking engagements and things like conferences and things like that. And that went away essentially overnight. But my business, and I'm fortunate, my business hasn't slowed down at all, but my audience has changed. So now I'm not really speaking at these large conferences. What I'm doing is I'm doing deep dive workshops with leadership teams. And so usually I'll do a series of 4 different workshops with a leadership team to help them, because what they want is they say, recognize we need to become agile and future ready, but we don't know how to do it. And in my mind, the only way an organization is going to go from less agile to more agile is they've actually got to change their mindsets. They've got to see the world differently than they did before. And so when we talk about mindsets, it gets at that agility, gets at agility at a very foundational level. And so that's currently where I'm doing most of my work.
It sounds like a great audience for you in working with leadership teams, because I know there's something to a leader when they put a team around them that already is a predisposition that they're going to be agile, that they're going to be coachable, that they know there's a gap because they can't do it all anymore, and they have to put a team around them. Can you speak to how the shifting and adapting of oneself, how does that play in with having a leadership team with those who you are doing those deep dive workshops with?
Well, it's really interesting. I'm seeing a theme across the organizations that I'm working with. And this isn't every organization, but it is pretty common. And the theme is the CEO or executives are saying, we need to become more agile. And so then they go to their training and development staff and they say, bring in an expert to help us. And so the training and development person brings in the expert, and then sets up the expert in front of most of the organization's leaders and managers and even employees. So that's usually I come in and I'm doing a workshop with the organization's leaders and managers. As I'm meeting with these leaders and managers and employees, they say to me, this is great and I love this personally, but the reality is we've got a culture here where you're saying we need to be agile, but I'm feeling from the top down, I can't fail, I have to be right, and I can't have any problems. And so that's one of the tricky things about working with a leadership team is they want to be agile, but they don't want it to be difficult for them, right? And becoming more agile and really focusing on mindsets is an invitation to become more of something that we want to become, that we actually have to change ourselves. And that's not necessarily an easy proposition, particularly when these leaders feel some pressures that are not conducive to agility. So they feel the pressure to look good, be right, avoid problems, and get ahead. And if those are the pressures that they're feeling, it's really hard for them to learn and grow, to seek after truth, to reach goals, and to lift others, which are the desires we need to have if we really want to be agile.
Certainly, when you think about organizations and shifting this big ship, right, from one side to the other, it's a lot easier said than done to come from the top and say, we need to be more agile. Let's go and actually do it. And yet, you make a good point. This year, you had to be agile whether you were ready or not. Here we come, right? So let's go back to as well the entrepreneurs now. So we talked a little bit about the stalled professionals. We talked about a little bit of the organizations. I'm assuming the entrepreneurs would fall under the natural achievers and go-getters, and we're going to make things happen. But their whole world's got rocked as well. And what would you say, from your experience, maybe yourself as an entrepreneur or other entrepreneurs out there, what have you seen in terms of how they need to shift their mindset, even though they're a natural achiever to begin with, they're already going, maybe they're already agile, but their world gets rocked, right? Maybe their business has to close for a couple of months and they don't have any revenue being generated. What have you been saying to those achievers during this period?
Yeah, it's really tricky because, and it's for not everybody, not just entrepreneurs, is when we go through a crisis, our natural inclination is if we're a turtle, is to pull our head into our shells and self-protect. Yep. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're changing, right? Because when we're in self-protection mode, we're trying to just holding on and hoping that the environment around us will improve so that I could stick my neck out again. The entrepreneurs that are really successful during a crisis are those that are really intentional about keeping their necks out. And rather than waiting for the environment to change, they move, right? They go to a place that has a better environment. And that's what being agile is. So let me give you an example of a couple of pizza places that are down the street from my house. And they're on opposite sides of an intersection. And it's been really interesting to watch them, particularly when COVID first hit, because one pizza place, they effectively went dark. It's like they kind of didn't exist. They were open, but they're there, but everybody else was wondering, are they open, right? They didn't have these signs out that says we're still open or anything like that. The pizza place on the other side of the intersection, they also had to shut down for dine-in guests. But what they did is they became very active on social media in the community. And they were posting on community pages, not just buy pizza. It was, how can we support you? And one of the things that they did is they said, we have some make it home pizza kits that you can have a memorable experience with our family. So they adapted what they're doing. And then at the time you couldn't buy any toilet paper in California. And they said, we'll throw in a roll of toilet paper if you buy this make it home pizza kit.
Oh, there you go. That's the key right there.
Yeah. So to me, what was really interesting about these two organizations is the one organization that kind of went dark, this pizza place, is they were focused on on themselves and benefiting themselves in the short term. Like how do we survive in the short term? Well, when they take that position, are they doing anything that's bettering their customers or the committee or the community? Not in the short term. And if you look in the long term, are they doing anything now that's going to put them in a better position in the future, or is going to put their customers or the community in a better position? No, but it feels good right now because they're just protecting themselves. This other pizza place, when they're doing all of this effort, they're actually probably biting the bullet a little bit. They're probably actually spending more money than what they're bringing in. But so while they may not be benefiting themselves in the short run, they are benefiting their customers and they're benefiting the community. And by doing that, what they're doing is they're setting themselves up for creating deeper relationships with their customers to benefit them in the long run. So by taking a short-term sacrifice themselves, to benefit others in the short term, they're also benefiting everybody in the long term. This other group who's trying to seek out their own self-interest in the short term, they're not benefiting anybody, including themselves, both in the short term and in the long term. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, there's no doubt. I mean, you have to, one of the things that, it probably strikes me this other pizza place too was doing is, they were trying to give back to the community with no expectation of a return. They just wanted the heart was in the right place. The mind was in the right place. And it's probably going to pay them back in spades.
Yeah, because they're deepening that relationship, because now they're going to have customers for life because of their ability to connect with them and provide service and memories with people and families.
Ryan, question for you, as we scope out and look at you as an entrepreneur, I'm curious if you have, and if you haven't wordsmithed it, if you could just talk out with us some of what is your purpose, what is your meaning?
Yeah, and if I was at home, I've got this like posted right behind my computer. But to me, and to summarize it, I want to empower others to become their very best. And I think that in my mind, and this is just the way that I think, and it's based upon what I've learned, is that we're going to do the best at developing and improving ourselves if we can deepen our self-awareness and understand our mindsets, because they're the foundation of everything that we do. And so if I want to empower others to become the very best that they can, I feel like I need to take them on this introspective deep dive and uncover the things that may be holding them back from where they want to go. And I need to give them the key that will unlock the transition that they need to make from where they are now to their better version of themselves.
That is excellent. I recently heard the 3 criteria to evaluate a good purpose by. And
all right, I'm being evaluated by Rich here.
That's right. One of them is it can't be bought. The second one is it's not time bound. And then the last one is it includes beneficiaries other than yourself. So in a purpose statement where it can't be bought, it's not time bound, and you're not the sole beneficiary, it's so important for an entrepreneur to have a purpose like that to be able to propel themselves forward in action in the product or service that they're distributing to their customers. And I see that in yours, obviously, when you go empower others to become their very best, like that fits all of those criteria. You go, it can't be bought. You can't buy that. There's no time limit. There's no time bound piece of that. And they're beneficiaries other than you. Do you find when you reference that other pizza place and you talked about relationships and there was really a benefit to others, do you find that to be, let me ask that in an open-ended way. Where do you find that to play in the success of entrepreneurs early on and maybe mid-stage or long-term on how that plays in, being clear on that purpose and it being constructed in a way like that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, purpose is key. And here's why. I guess, let me ask you guys this question. How do you think most people, and so I'm making an assumption here, and it's back to, I read an HBR article that 80% of business leaders do not have an individualized purpose for themselves. And so if the majority of people don't have an individualized purpose, I think that they establish a default purpose. And I guess, what would you say, I'm going to flip the question just a little bit. How do you think most people measure their lives? Any thoughts?
You know, it's a great question. I don't know. I would say that most don't measure. And, you know, I was talking recently to somebody about the definition of integrity. And my definition of integrity is not necessarily that you do what you say you're going to do to other people, but it's how are you, you know, how do you measure yourself? How do you evaluate yourself? And you say you're going to go to the gym, but you don't go to the gym. You don't have integrity. Like also self-integrity is a big component. But I think more people are more prone to have a 3 to 5 day business planning meeting for their business to create their vision, create their KPIs, and create where they're going to go. But then individually, they don't do it. Although yet they know that you need to have a vision and a mission and metrics to go somewhere. So if you ask about measurements, I think entrepreneurs sometimes have a hard time measuring their business, but I don't think they even try and necessarily measure their personal goals. As identified by this HBR article, like 80% don't have individual goals or metrics. I think that would be a very accurate statement. So
I'd tag on to that, Ryan, that I've got a book here called Eat That Frog that I just happened to talk to my 20-year-old about just earlier this week. One of the things that I know that's in this book is 3% of adults have clear written goals. Just 3%. So when you ask, how do you think people measure their success? I think the majority of people don't. I think only about 3% of people who have clear written goals. And the HBR article you read said 80% don't have it. So somewhere between 3 and 80% in these two literary works say it's not being measured. So I think what people are left to measure is, can they pay their bills every month, is a measurement, and it's something that is actually measurable. I think at some point, many people wake up somewhere around the age that John and I are, in our mid-40s, and they go, am I happy if life keeps going this way? And there's this midlife crisis that's the measurement point to say, on this trajectory, is this the life that I wanted? And then, you know, that causes maybe some things to happen differently once they have that measurement point.
Yeah. No, great thoughts. And so just going back to the question is, why is purpose essentially so important? Well, when we don't have a clearly defined purpose, and particularly one, and I think, Rich, one of the things you nailed on the head is it needs to be something that is bigger than us. And I think that's really key. It involves an impact on others. Because when we don't have a clearly defined purpose, I think in general, the default is we measure our life in terms of success, what personal success. But then the question becomes, well, what aspect of personal success? How do you define personal success? Is this hitting our KPIs? Is this reaching a certain job status? Is this a big house? Is this a nice car? Is this designer jeans? Well, and then we can ask the question, well, how do we, if we default to personal success, how do we determine how we define personal success? Well, I think that's based upon the peers that we associate with, the people that we respect and what they value. And so what that means is if our default, if we haven't selected a purpose for ourselves, our default ends up being something that's self-focused and something that other people determine, essentially. And so what happens if we are exposed to an ethical dilemma? Well, if we're in the ethical dilemma and we measure our lives in terms of personal success, we're going to do whatever it takes for us to get through it effectively. Now, you can enter in a whole bunch of examples. I'll just throw out Enron. Enron starts taking the leaders, their default purpose is personal success. Well, what are they going to do? We're going to engage in fraudulent practices to ensure that we continue to be successful the way that we measure it, right? But here's the difference that having a clear purpose, particularly one that is outward focused, is you look at any great leaders, you look at people like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Abraham Lincoln, right? These are the stereotypical great leaders. And we could ask ourselves, how did they measure their lives? In my mind, they didn't measure it in terms of personal success. They measured it in terms of their contribution to others. And so when they're hit with an ethical dilemma, what are they inclined to do? Are they inclined to focus on what's best for them? Or are they inclined to do what is difficult for them, but for a greater good? And that's what they end up doing. And so to me, that's the power of purpose. And so that's probably a much longer-winded answer than you were looking for. But to me, that's the power of purpose because it gets us outside of ourselves and it gets us doing things that are great, and particularly for others, as opposed to something that's minor and self-protecting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Ryan, we met a couple of years ago, and I knew there was a reason I liked you. John, I remember this. You remember this binder, John?
Let me see it.
It says great day on this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So in this, John and I created, I don't know if you still have yours. We each created some material on purpose and where we were going to be fulfilled and so forth earlier on in our careers. And I'm going to look up real quick. Give me just a minute. And I'm going to get, if I could find it faster, it'd be way more. Here we go. Purpose. This one's mine, and it's similar to yours. I knew there was a reason I liked it.
All right.
I've got to lead a mass of people to match performance to their potential for a purpose which they determine. I didn't even know those three criteria back when John and I were creating journals on how we were going to, measure success and having short-term and mid-term, long-term goals and so forth. And it's validating to me that you have a very similar purpose as to what I've written, and that really hasn't changed throughout my career, that I've looked to influence more people. I have always said what I'm looking to do is looking to influence more people more deeply and more quickly. And that's the opportunity that, for example, doing this podcast presented to me, which is why this had to be a yes, is that's what I want to do. This fulfills that. For whatever number of listeners we can impact, it's more people than not doing it.
I love it. Thanks for sharing, Rich.
And that's great, Rich. And I'm disappointed to say I don't have my binder anymore, but I certainly have taken the practice.
Unacceptable.
Because it is true. As young entrepreneurs, that's what we were kind of focused at the time of writing that book. And we had mentors that guided us in this right direction to articulate what our purpose and vision and personally was, all the way to the point that, and Rich could probably relate to the story, but, I remember at Y2K, January 1st of 2000, for whatever reason, I created a list of all the things I was looking for in a significant other, because I was ready to kind of find the right person and slow down. And I created a list of 34 things of exactly what I was looking for in a significant other. And in my wedding, my wedding speech, unbeknownst to my wife at the time, is I pulled out that list and read the list that I created, 4 years prior or 5 years prior, what I was looking for. And sure enough, I found what I was looking for, because I had a goal, I had a purpose, I had and maybe that's a little obsessive to being exactly what you're looking for in life, but certainly if you don't know where you're going, you don't know what you want for your life or beyond your life, what you're trying to bring to the world, it guides you potentially in the wrong directions, unbeknownst to you. So let me switch the gears here just a little bit, Ryan, as an entrepreneur. Obviously we've talked about how you've been affecting entrepreneurs through your skills and professionalism in this industry. But talk to us about you converting from a professor to an entrepreneur. What was your biggest learning moment of, oh, okay, that's something I didn't expect, or this is something I had to overcome as moving from a professional to an entrepreneur?
Well, I'm going to answer that in two ways. One is at a more basic level, pre being an entrepreneur, I think what I was almost like this ship captain, and I'm in this ship that's kind of in the harbor or out. You could see out there's a reef, and that's where the breakers are kind of crashing. But where I'm at is really smooth water. And before being an entrepreneur, I'm in the safe water. I'm thinking, man, this is great. The water is warm. It is smooth. It is clear. I can go snorkeling whenever I want. And I look out past the breaker, and while there's the idea that adventure awaits, it's almost like getting past that breaker just seems really scary. Like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Moana, but they portray this really well. And so when I made the leap to becoming an entrepreneur, what I was doing is saying, I'm getting out past that breaker because I want to get to a destination that is out there that I will never be able to get to if I stay in here. And what I think, to me, one of the things that I've learned about this is because that seems so scary to me. But now that I've been out there for a little bit and I've faced the waves that you go up and down, I've faced some storms, is while those things aren't, particularly the bottom part of those waves, while that's not fun, I would say the journey is much more enjoyable than I anticipated it being. That almost those ups and downs is, instead of seeing this as a bad thing, I see it as this makes the journey more exciting. And then it's not as, what's the word I want to use? I almost want to say it's not as scary as I thought it would be to get outside the breakers. And it's actually a lot more fun to be catching the wind and at certain times just flying across the water. And so to me, that's been a huge breakthrough, just in terms of my own mentality. And I think that that's part of what it takes. The other breakthrough for me has been that it's been really scary to make some investments that, I mean, I took out a home line of credit in order to fund some certain aspects of my business that would allow for me to reach higher and further. And that's been very scary. And I still haven't, necessarily collected on that. It's still an investment waiting to be paid off. But I guess I am extremely sympathetic to entrepreneurs who have to make that leap, right? Who have to make that tough decision of, I'm putting my financial well-being on the line and I'm betting on myself. And that is really scary. And I don't think that enough entrepreneurs talk about how scary that first initial big leap is. And so I almost want to bring it up just to say, it's scary, but at the same time, you can do it. In doing it, it pushes you in ways that you would never be pushed otherwise. And it's that pushing that I believe will allow the individual to achieve the purpose that they're seeking. That I don't think they'll ever achieve that purpose without taking that form of a risk. I don't know. Does that make sense, or does that resonate with your guys' experience?
Totally. I think pushing past being scary is something that entrepreneurs have in common. And then the other piece of that, I would say, would be enduring suffering and learning what it takes to move past it or live with it. Can you speak to something where in your entrepreneurial journey, you really experienced what was some suffering even for a period of time, or maybe you're suffering now through something as an entrepreneur? Would you be open to sharing what that might be for you? What comes to mind?
Yes, for sure. And there's one that's fresh. So when COVID started happening and all my speaking engagements went away, and I at the university, all my classes went online, is I now had a chunk of free time that I could do something with. And I thought, man, I would love to, and I knew my book launch was coming out soon. How do I capitalize on this book launch? And one of my thoughts was, and I got networked with somebody who introduced this to me, is why don't I create an online course? And so I went about the business. I got some people who were very gung-ho about this. They had demonstrated success helping others build online courses. I thought, this will be great. I'll make this investment. I'll create an online course. And in the process, because I've got some partners in it, is I'm paying them to help me develop this course. And so we launched that my book came out end of May, or first part of May, launched the course first part of June, and then it's been running for about 3.5 months now. And I'm in it at this point in time, somewhere between 20 and 25 grand. And part of this is we're spending a lot of money on advertisements through different social media sites as a way to try to build some traction and some momentum. And it just hasn't been clicking. And so I've sold some courses, but I'm nowhere near my investment, right? So I'm operating way in the red. And I had to, just this last week, make the decision to pull the plug on it. And it was not an easy decision. The course is still there and I'm still going to sell it. But in terms of working with these individuals and spending as much money as I was on advertising and marketing, it wasn't having the effect. And I had to to me, that was a really difficult decision, is at what point do you say, I just need to keep pushing through? And at what point do I say I need to pull the plug? And for me, and I talked to a lot of people to try to get advice. And for me, the right time was to pull the plug. And so it's not easy to sit here now and say, I made a $20,000 investment essentially that didn't pay off. And there's other benefits that you can't account for financially. But the way that I'm trying to navigate around this now is, what did I learn from this? And how can I leverage that learning to navigate into the future more successfully? And I would say, while it sucks to, at least in this project, be in the red, some of the learnings that I've gained from it have been invaluable. And so that's at least one of the ways I guess I'm justifying my experience, but I'm still wrestling with some of those feelings and emotions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think the two things that you had mentioned there are so healthy in looking at something like a story like that, where there is some suffering, there is a learning lesson, is you go, what did I learn and how do I use it in the future? I think when we get on the wrong side of it as entrepreneurs is when we ask why questions. Why did I do that? Why am I where I am? And when we ask why questions, we learn how to be where we are. When we ask how questions, they're typically future-based. How can I use that in future? How can I become more positive? How can I grow my business? Instead of, why did that marketing campaign not work? Those aren't the questions that you're asking. You're not asking, why did it not work? You're asking, how do I use this learning in the future? I think it's really key when we look at suffering to look at the learning lesson and then pull it future-based to be able to stay positive, but also to use it so it actually matters. It makes a difference. Where the future has not been written, to decode the past, there's some value, but we can't stay there long. It's the reason why the rear view mirror is so small in comparison to the windshield.
Yep.
And so, Ryan, as we bring kind of all this together, an entrepreneur listening to this podcast is listening, you know what, I may need to set my vision and purpose and, think about journaling and read Success Mindset. I mean, where would you start? If you're an entrepreneur listening to this, I probably need to adjust a few things here. What would you recommend they do? What would be the kind of marching orders from here?
Yeah, I would, and of course I'm biased, but I feel like I've got some good backing on this, is to me, and if you see, I send out a weekly newsletter and I always sign it essentially the same. Success starts with your mindsets. So it's all about, really our success is all about how we're seeing the world. And one of the things that's interesting, so I've got a free mindset assessment. Anybody could take this on my website. I've had website's RyanGottfredson.com. I've had 11,000 people take this mindset assessment. And I focus on 4 different sets of mindsets, and only 5% are in the top quartile for all 4 sets of these mindsets. So that means that 95% of us have some work to do with our mindsets. And what I've learned for myself, and I think I focus on mindsets because I probably need as much help with my mindsets as anybody. As I used to be on these 4 continuums, I was on the negative side for each of these. And now I think I'm much more on the positive. I'm doing better with some than others. But I think most entrepreneurs, I guess let me phrase this differently, is if we've got 2 pedals, like in a car, we've got the accelerator and we've got the brake. I think we've got both of our feet are on both of those pedals. You see, the foot that's on the accelerator is our goals. The foot that is on our brake is our mindset-induced fears and commitments and insecurities. And too often, if we want to kind of get going faster, what we naturally think is, I got to put more weight on the accelerator. But even if you put more weight on the accelerator and that brake is to the floor, you're not going to go anywhere. You're locked up. So in reality, what needs to happen is we actually don't need to put any more weight on the accelerator. We've actually got to pull off the brake. We've got to pull off of our fears and our commitments and our insecurities. And as soon as we do that, naturally, we'll kind of forward. And I feel like that's kind of been my experience as I've shifted my mindsets and has started my entrepreneurship journey. Is, in fact, to me, my mindset shifted first, then I became an entrepreneur. And that was the natural byproduct of shifting my mindsets. Now, there's some people who are entrepreneurs and, okay, I'm an entrepreneur, but then they've still got their foot on the brake to a certain degree. We've all got our own fears and insecurities, but if we can awaken to those, and I think we could best awaken to those through a focus on mindsets, then that'll help us pull the foot off the brake and we could get where we want to go.
That's excellent. Right. So fill out the mindset. We'll certainly provide the link to everybody. They can go fill out the mindset assessment from your website. I'm sure you'll have a lot more than 11,000 after this. And I definitely look forward to filling it out myself, because you're right. Everybody has work to do in this area. It's certainly an area that, even yourself, who's a professional in this area, an expert in this industry, is saying, hey, I also have room to grow. So we all do. So I really appreciate that. And we'll certainly promote that assessment out there. Rich?
Ryan, can you give us, what do you do to stay sharp yourself on how do you practice continuous improvement? I know you mentioned a Harvard Business Review article, but what are some of the things that you're reading? What are some things you're doing that you're watching to practice continuous improvement yourself?
Yeah, so to me, the word that is always going through my mind related to questions like this is intentionality. Is we've got to be intentional. And for me, that means, in order for me to be intentional about my day and my week and my month and my year, even my next meeting, whatever that might be, is I've got to take the time to be intentional. So for me, on a daily basis, it's my morning time. Like I use that time. The first thing I do every morning is I do my 5-minute journal. The second thing I do is I get an email from the universe. If anybody wants to get an email every day from the universe, go to tut.com. And those are the first 2 things. And then what that does is that puts me in a positive frame of mind. Then the third thing I do is I go to my planner, which I've already set out, usually every Sunday morning is I spend an hour setting my weekly goals, which are aligned with my annual goals. And then I also set daily goals that will help me get to those weekly goals. So after I do my 5-minute journal, my notes from the universe, that's when I go to the planner is what is my goals for today and what do I need to do to accomplish those? And usually in my planner, I've kind of built out a schedule that will allow me the ability to focus on what is most important instead of the things that are urgent. So having a planner has also been really beneficial. The planner that I use is called the Full Focus Planner by Michael Hyatt. And it allows me to break down my big goals into bite-sized daily nuggets. And it kind of goes through the process of taking annual goals to quarterly goals to weekly goals to daily goals. And that's served to help me to be really intentional about my day and my life.
Thanks for that. And thank you for making it work today for your schedule. We could talk for another couple of hours, but we need you to get a pair of Mickey Mouse ears on at some point here during your day.
Yep. Well, we had them on earlier today, so we'll get them back on tomorrow. That's for sure.
That's great. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here and making time for it. And I know our listeners are really going to get quite a bit out of the story that you told and some of the principles you shared.
Awesome. Thanks for the opportunity. It's great. Always great chatting with you.
Great. Thanks, Ryan.
Yep.